How is the stride created, and which leg is more important? In this episode, everything you ever wanted to know about the stride, including everything you didn't know about the stride, will be covered. Also, we'll talk about bicep soreness, how coaches can creatively work within pitch count regulations, and how the thumb can create more movement on your pitches. All this and more in Season 4, Episode 8 of The Fix. All right, Season 4, Episode 8 of The Fix with pitching motion troubleshooter Angel Borrelli. And this week we're going to start off with some trending topics that are centered around pitch counts. And first off, there's something that a lot of our East Coast coaches are running into in the American Legion. We have American Legion out here. It's a league that's generally for high school kids in the summer. I think it's around 14 years old to 18 years old. And this is the first year that they have to deal with some new pitch count and rest guidelines. Now, Angel and I talked about the high school pitch count and recovery guidelines last year, because this was going to be the first year that we talked about. Now it's starting to affect the American Legion teams. During the regular season, it's not a very big deal because the teams, they only play like maybe twice a week, maybe 3 times a week, and they can kind of work around the recovery times. But now that it's getting toward the end of the season and a lot of the leagues are now getting into tournaments and tournament play and championships and that sort of thing, now all of a sudden the recovery days are proving to be a challenge for a lot of coaches who have not really managed their pitchers in such a way and have had such restrictions. So interestingly, I don't want to get too far into this as far as the American Legion rules, because their pitch and recovery thing is a little different from the ones that we've always followed, but they do have something in place. And I just wanted to say something. I wanted to find, there's a quote from an American Legion coach over here. I'm not going to say who he is or where he's from just to protect the innocent, but he's having some trouble with managing his pitching staff in these tournaments. And he says, "I don't like all the rule changes. One reason is that we play by major league rules, 9-inning games, but we only have an 18-man roster. That makes it really tough. I like having the pitch count maximum at 120. That's fine. But the same amount of rest for 70-something pitches doesn't make a lot of sense and puts a lot of strain on teams." So let's not get too far into what the rules are. But what I'd like to ask you, Angel, I know that you deal with a lot of teams and coaches out there on the West Coast, and I know that they've been dealing with these new pitch count restrictions in their leagues. Could you kind of like give us some advice on what coaches should be doing or could be doing that have new pitch count and recovery regulations thrown upon them to kind of like get their way through this kind of a situation where it's like a tournament and you may have like 3 games in 5 days or something like that?
Yeah. Well, I think that what has been missing with the trying to enforce pitch counts is, anybody talking directly to the coaches and the hearts of the coaches to say, listen, it is really important to even have these rules. I think resistance to rules makes you not be creative with how you're going to deal with the rules. In other words, coaches are still walking around complaining about it because nobody's ever really taken the time or convinced them that maybe they're even necessary. Because of course the coaches want to win games, and you don't want your son on a team if they never win games. So coaches want to win games for a lot of reasons. But with the amount of injuries that are occurring, I think this is a good step forward, that at least there's some rules in place. I mean, the rules are so enforced now that you have to forfeit a game if you have a pitcher go over a certain pitch count. Now, And so, yes, so when I came on the scene in 1995, working with pitchers as a strength coach at that time, but focusing on pitchers only, and of course I was in graduate school, I decided to be mentored by the ASMI, which is so I embraced everything, all the biomechanics stuff, and I was studying that. And the pitchers I was working with, because they were so enthralled with these very specific programs for them, they would come to me with, "Hey, do you know when I should throw a bullpen?" At that point, they never even knew when they should throw a bullpen. They never even knew how many pitches they threw in a game. So I started doing research, and the USA Baseball guidelines, which are the ones that I follow, and by the way, you can download them for free on my website. They were the ones that in the late 90s, I was using their guidelines. They just changed them, and they changed them by a few pitches here and there. And I don't know why they changed them, because it would actually allow some of my pitchers to throw maybe a few more pitches with only 1 day recovery, and I don't believe in that, because I'll tell you why. I have used these guidelines as a naive, as a neophyte, somebody starting in the baseball industry. I started using guidelines that were put forth by an organization that knew more than I did. And then what I would do, just the way I do everything, is I use them, I talk to my pitchers, I get their feedback, and I see what kind of result we're getting. And I have never shifted once out of using these guidelines. They work. And even though sometimes you look at them and they may look confusing, like, hey, if a pitcher throws 80 pitches, he has to have 4 days rest. Well, if he throws 100, he has to have 4 days rest. Well, why isn't he having more rest? I know you might go, gee, he might need 5 days. But the deal is there's kind of really deep reasons why it kind of makes sense that 4 days max is cool. And I don't want to have to go into that. But I think the take-home message is I have used these guidelines, and I have the reputation for having pitchers that stay uninjured. And of course, and then I developed my warm-up program. And so all my pitchers follow USA Baseball guidelines. They follow my first pitch strike preparation recovery program. Those two things together work beautifully. Now, what teams and what coaches, how did they come about trying to follow this? Well, out here, coach pitchers that were working with me, and I work with the creme de la creme, the coaches knew that I was watching, and of course the parents were educated. So coaches became motivated to follow the guidelines for whatever reason. And I had coaches calling me that were with the youth teams where they play tons of games. And then I had high school coaches talking to me because my clients, who were their best pitchers, were being looked at and they were uninjured, and they didn't want the risk of having their pitcher get injured because they didn't follow the guidelines that the kid was actually raised on. So that maybe for 6, 7 years he'd been following them. So these coaches possibly were motivated not so much by what we want them to be motivated by, which is safety for the pitcher, but sometimes a dual. Let's put it this way, a dual reason. Yeah, I want his arm to be good, but what am I going to do for rotations? And I can tell the coaches out there that some of the top travel ball coaches out here in California in the Bay Area, and they had my really good pitchers on the road. This is the truth. They would call me and say, Angel, how many pitches can he throw today if I need him in 2 days? I mean, I need to put him in, but when do I pull him? I mean, how do I do that? I say, oh, easy. Or they'll say, Angel, I need to use him twice. It turns out we've got 4 days of pitching. How would you do it? And I would throw it out. Now, they're asking me only because this kid's somebody who's about to get drafted, right? And they don't want him getting injured. But they used that information and they manipulated the way the pitchers were rotating. With the youth pitchers, the 12 and 11 and 12-year-olds, the coach would say, "How can I use my pitchers twice?" And I'd say, "Well, you can pitch. There's so many pitches and it's only 1 day recovery or it's no recovery. Would you consider on the first day putting in two of your best pitchers for 2 innings or one pitcher for 3 innings, and then in 2 days they could go again, and the next day you use your starter, and things that were creative like that, using the lower pitch count so that somebody could make an appearance on the first day, and maybe on day 3 now he's coming in and throwing the full pitch count that he does to see the tournament out. And the youth coaches were loving that, and they were actually laughing, saying, God, the other teams were looking at us because we were changing pitchers every 2 innings. But guess what? We had our 5 best pitchers. We had our 4 best pitchers throwing in one day, and it was awesome. We won the game. And now you've got pitchers who can throw again. So those are ways to do it. So yes, coaches, I know it is very, very complicated, but it is a matter of rotating and working with your rotation. Now with the older kids, the high school, what the coach would do at this one high school where I had 3 or 4 really successful pitchers that were all working and they always were recovered, they would have the number in their head that he could go to so they could use him on the 3rd day or the 4th day. And so a pitcher would know, I'm coming out whatever inning because I can't go over 59, because I've got a 59 with the USA guidelines that I follow is the last day, the last pitch count for 2 days. If he threw 60, he'd have to have 3 days recovery. And we never violate it, even by 1 pitch. So in order for that pitcher to have only 2 days off and be able to pitch on the 4th day again, maybe the final game, they'd pull him at 59. What was funny is I have pitchers so talented, they say, you know what, I'm going to get the job done in 59 pitches. So it would kind of be a joke, and I'll be darned if some of them didn't get amazing things done knowing that they could only throw so many pitches. The main take-home message from this is be creative. Look at the lower pitch count rules and see how you can get a pitcher in twice in a tournament, but maybe using him. There are experts sometimes that thinks, hey, why don't we put our closers in at the beginning of the game? Think of your starter as maybe the guy who gets the game off to a good start. You put him in for 2 innings, you put him in the middle, whatever. You're using him for a lower pitch count because he's really the starter in 3 days. Start to work with the lower pitch counts. But the real take-home message from this is believe in the recovery guidelines. First of all, you have to. Now that you know they're there, you have to. Your party is ruined. If a kid gets hurt and the parent knows you didn't follow the recovery guidelines, that's going to be the first thing they're going to say. Know that they work. Know that as complicated as it is, it's to the benefit and it keeps you safe. And then put on your little creative hat and go to it.
Yeah, thanks, Angel. I mean, that's basically what you do in life. I mean, when things change that you can't control, you really don't have much choice, but you have to change to adjust to what's been changed on you. So, you can no longer go by the traditional idea of putting your very best pitcher out there in the first inning and letting him go until he's out of gas. I mean, there are now rules in place, and now look at it more as an opportunity. Like you said, it's, maybe you use your ace pitcher for 2 innings of the first game and the second game and the third game, or however you can work it out. And then you actually have that quality spread out over 3 games instead of just 1. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that this can be attacked, but the basic thing is that these are rules. You do have to follow them, and make it an opportunity rather than something that's a challenge or a problem.
Yeah, and I invite any coach. Coaches call me all the time, and I love hearing from you guys because I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you. I do see what your job is, and I understand it from both sides. There is a way to do it. And, I have coaches call me with a scenario and say, hey, what about this? Or, the season's over, and should he continue pitching? Or, I've got this tournament coming up, and what am I going to do? And, and I ask questions. I don't tell you what to do. I ask questions because out of every coach's mouth, I'm going to hear the answer. And the coach, because I've asked the right question, he'll go, oh, wait a minute, I just saw something. And it can actually be fun. It can be a little creative. But listen, this is the name of the game these days. And if you want to get more out of a kid's arm, and coaches, please know this. I want to inspire you to want to follow these rules. The rules are in place for a reason because scientists, who those of us who have been part of creating these kind of guidelines, we know why the guidelines are in place on a level that you can't see, on the tissue level, on tissue deformation level, on fiber breakdown level, on a deep level. The pitcher that you want to break a rule with and you want to put him in tomorrow when he pitched 80 pitches today, guess what? He's not going to perform for you anyway. So please know that you'll have a pitcher whose tissue cannot produce what you want. He will have to use other areas of the muscle. The brain takes care of that. That's a way the brain recruits fibers. And that muscle's not going to pull the same way. So you'll see a mechanics breakdown, possibly an injury. But the pitcher that's in your brain that you feel like, I want him on the hill again, guess what? That pitcher that you're thinking about, he's not the same guy that started your first game. He's a guy in recovery. And you don't want a pitcher in recovery on the mound. They don't do well, and then they try harder, and every one of you coaches knows what it looks like when a kid starts overthrowing because he doesn't have the gas, and they know they don't. So remember that. Don't be like, I wish I could put him in again. No, you don't. Not if he's not recovered. He's not the same guy. And that's the true motivation to follow these guidelines and get creative. And any coach that needs help with getting a kickstart on some ideas, please feel free to contact me. I'd be more than happy to go through, because one coach can save hundreds of arms once he gets with the program and figures it out.
Yeah, really good points. And I just want to say one more time, I just want to make sure everyone heard it the first 2 times. These rules are in place and they were put together by scientists. But even if you don't trust the rules because you're not sure where they came from, I want to point to you, Angel. You have been using these rules for about 20 years, would you say?
Mm-hmm. Yes, in late 90s. Yes, 95 to 99 is when I first started, taking over sort of engineering pitchers, their whole profile, how they went through about with all their systems and everything.
Yeah. So this isn't a thing where it's like, well, these people came up with these numbers out of the blue and we don't even know if they really work or not. You have 20 years of experience proving that those rules work. You've never really had any major injuries with any of your pitchers, correct?
None.
Wow. There you go. So
yeah.
Thank you for all that, Angel. I think it's a really important topic that a lot of coaches are dealing with right now and will probably be dealing with, at some point in the future, if not already. So I have another pitch count issue, and it deals with a major league pitcher this time. It's Zack Wheeler of the New York Mets, our favorite team to pick on every week. He has been pitching in his first season after Tommy John surgery, and he's been doing pretty well for the most part in the first half. And at the beginning of the season, there was concern over how he could get through the entire season, being it was his first year after surgery. Maybe he needs to be limited either in his pitches or in his innings or this or that. So now that he's pitching well, and the Mets have had some pitching injuries to their staff already, they've lost a couple guys, Matt Harvey, Noah Syndergaard, we've talked about it. If for them to stay in the playoff race, they need Zack Wheeler to keep on the mound. They don't want to limit him at this point because now they need him to pitch. He's one of their more effective pitchers. So there's a concern now of, do they skip him a couple starts? Do they put him in the bullpen for a while? Do they limit his pitches, in certain games? Now, another little wrinkle that just came up right before the All-Star break, he had a couple of games where he didn't pitch so well, and he was put on the disabled list with what was officially called biceps tendinitis, but unofficially the Mets said they thought it was fatigue. So now, I have a couple questions here, but, first of all, what should they be doing with his pitch load? Is it, when you come off of Tommy John surgery, does a pitcher need to be limited, and how do you limit him? Or how do you skip starts? I'm not sure what you're supposed to do. And secondly, what really is biceps tendinitis, and how does that occur in terms of, does that happen because he's throwing too much? Does it happen because he's coming off Tommy John surgery and he's throwing beyond what he should be in his first year after healing? Or, I'm I'm a little interested in this whole situation, how it might play out, but I'd like to hear your perspective.
Well, let me ask you a question, and the questions I'm asking would be a question that coaches would ask the pitcher himself or someone else if they were trying to find out the important information. So, first of all, Joe, is he actually back in the rotation with the Mets right now, or is he only making rehab starts in the minor league? I haven't been following the Mets, so
He was put on the disabled list, and during that time he was on the disabled list, he had 11 days of rest, and then he came back to pitch after those 11 days, and he did not do well. He only pitched about 3 innings, 3 and 2/3 innings, and threw 82 pitches,
okay.
and then he was taken out.
So he had Tommy John surgery, went through all the rehab, went through all the throwing programs, and then returned to the major league rotation, pitched in
Correct.
some games, then all of a sudden had a problem, went on the DL, came
Yeah.
back, and it's not resolved.
As far as I know, that they said that he might have,
The
uh,
bicep tendinitis.
yeah, that's
Okay.
and they weren't sure.
Okay, so first of all, you have to assume, and the major leagues aren't that crazy, that, I mean, when a pitcher has Tommy John, there are steps you go through. And if he returns to play, returning a pitcher to play is the goal. And there are steps to get there: flat ground throwing programs, interval pitching programs, hitters standing in, throwing BP,
Sure.
pitching in the minor leagues, etc. So you want to assume that he went back to playing after having many pitching appearances that weren't on the professional level facing hitters that let them know he could go back into the rotation.
Right.
But again, when the fact that he started pitching and then he started having problems, well, this is the classic thing that everyone's heard me say a million times. If you don't fix the original problem that gave you the issue that caused the surgery, you're still a pitcher that's not pitching with good mechanics. And I do have recollection of what he looks like, and he has some issues going on that are the type of issues that would affect the shoulder. Okay, so with that being said, you've got a guy coming that came off a surgery. I, as someone who can identify risk factors for certain areas of pain, identified that he has a certain style of coming out of the glove. He has an arm that's not in the correct place at the beginning of the motion where we want it, where it's the most important place. And those two things together create problems for the shoulder. Now, so when you tell me he has biceps tendinitis, I'm like, I know everybody's thinking that's an upper arm muscle, but if you've been listening to me long enough, you know that the biceps, one of the heads inserts in the labrum, and that's a shoulder issue. And so now we've got a confirmation. Now we're getting a symptom of something that has to do with the shoulder. And even though it's called biceps tendinitis, that's usually related to the way the shoulder's working. Okay. Now, the other thing that bicep does is it decelerates the pitch, and if he's having velocity problems, his deceleration is probably off because the brain is pretty good. It's not going to let you go into fifth gear if you don't have the brakes to stop it. But I can already tell you, I'm picturing his mechanics in my head. He's got something going on in his bicep because of something he's doing in his shoulder, and then also probably also not decelerating effectively. So what does this mean when you look at it? One, you've got to look at the mechanics. I deal with this problem all the time. Any parent out there or any coach out there, if your kid comes home and says, my bicep is sore, or no, I don't get sore after I pitch, only in my bicep, that is as bad as the forearm. But the forearm leads to Tommy John. The bicep leads to labral tears. So we don't want shoulder problems either. So right away, I'm going, one, if a pitcher with good mechanics has a sore bicep, guess what? His bicep isn't strong enough to handle the velocity he's throwing. Hey, wow, let's get him in the gym and strengthen it and try that approach. That's the first thing you look for after you've looked at the mechanics. Most of the time, bicep soreness comes from not decelerating correctly, not releasing the elbow at the end of the pitch, not finishing the pitch. The third reason is it's not strong enough to handle maybe increased velocity. But those first two things, I don't know if they're true for Zack. The weakness in the bicep, well, it's probably not strong enough to handle incorrect shoulder mechanics. So what they have to do is, and I know because of the questions you said they're asking, they're wondering, gee, if we only have him in an inning or two, will it not hurt? Is this overuse? Is it related to how many pitches he throws? Well, first of all, it's when you have that problem, it's because you're doing something wrong, and the thing you do wrong, you're doing it wrong when you play catch, and you're doing it wrong in your warm-up pitches. So volume probably isn't going to help it. That's the first thing. But secondly, the performance isn't there. So trying to find a way to get a pitcher to not be in pain and push the edges of maybe where he could pitch and not go past a point, the performance isn't going to be there. Because this is a highly important muscle that controls arm angle and everything else. Once the bicep breaks down, and listen, it doesn't feel good. Plus, the supraspinatus and the bicep tendon have a very intimate relationship. So the next thing, he's not going to be able to even get his arm up. But he does use the inverted W sort of technique, the elbows towards the sky. And so he's, internally rotating in the shoulders. So he has a mechanics issue. And it's real easy to find out if that's what's causing the pain. But so you have to address the symptoms. So in answer to your question, when you have a diagnosis of something that's wrong, it's wrong. I don't care if it hurts in the first 3 pitches or it doesn't hurt till 15. It's wrong, and at any moment it could blow up, and it's talking to you, and it can be worse. All he needs is to tear his labrum. So now he's a pitcher with a bad shoulder and a bad elbow. So, and by the way, pitchers that come off of elbow problems, a lot of time the reason why the elbow blew out is because the shoulder wasn't acting correctly and the elbow was the first thing to blow. So his elbow's holding up because he probably had great surgery. But now his shoulder is so this is sort of a pattern, and especially when you match it to his mechanics. So the Mets should be looking at his mechanics. This is sort of like, they have some other pitchers that have been good and gotten injured. You cannot return with the same flaws in the mechanics. And it's not that big of a deal to fix. And the pitcher is going to pitch better. So I hate to give you that bad news, but that's what I say.
It's ironic that all of the talk and the brain power being put behind what to do with Zack Wheeler is really focused on, how many pitches or how many innings he can throw before the end of the season, before his gas tank is empty or whatever you want to call it. And everyone is very concerned about the fact that he's coming off a UCL problem and oh my goodness, is this more throwing going to affect his elbow, when it sounds like what you're telling me is his previous shoulder mechanical issue was probably causing his elbow to go to work harder, which caused the elbow problem. And now that the elbow is strong, the shoulder problem is probably going to really rear its ugly head now because the flaw has never been fixed. So it's really all this talk and concern and energy put into, geez, how are we going to get Zack Wheeler to finish the season? They're putting all that energy into the wrong area instead of putting it into like, geez, how can we squeeze more pitches out of him? It should be, how can we fix his mechanical flaw so that we don't even have to worry about how many pitches he throws? Is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, and there's ways that I use to investigate when my job is to connect dots. So I don't know if his shoulder was the original problem. It doesn't matter. It's just an interesting connecting of dots that we've got a guy in this position. But all his issues happen before he even gets to the real part of the pitching motion. I have ways when I work with my pitchers that I make a decision on what I think the problem is, and then I have ways that I create a throwing motion that eliminates all the errors that he makes, and see, okay, now throw. Does it hurt? No, it doesn't hurt. Okay, then I know. Well, guess what? Something that happened prior to this motion here is where the problem lies. So that's the way you do a sort of a forensic analysis, and then you go ahead and you do sort of a forensic study, meaning you investigate and you create certain ways of eliminating. So this isn't a big deal. I feel so bad for these teams that think it's so difficult to figure this stuff out. And this pitcher can get back in the game unless it gets worse. But listen, his being put on the 11-day rest and not addressing the issue, and then putting him back in, they never really figured it out. And here's what I have a philosophy in my business. My pitchers know this that come to me because I deal with a lot of injured pitchers that are referred to me. No false starts. And I wish that major leagues, and I hope every coach hears me, please don't put your pitcher through that. It's devastating to the pitcher to rest for 2 weeks and then get on the mound and it still hurts. I've looked in the eyes of guys who the minute they throw a ball after coming off surgery, if it still hurts, the look in their eyes. And listen, just because pitchers aren't, they're not kings at emoting, they're internal beings. But listen, it's devastating. Every one of us knows that as a human. You think something's fixed, and then the next thing, it hurts again or it goes wrong again. It's a devastating experience. So what we want to do as practitioners is eliminate no false starts. Do everything you can to be sure that the guy is okay. So now Zack is dealing with trying to get this start and, being pulled again. And the ball was dropped somewhere. The ball was dropped somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but we talked about Zack Wheeler in an episode 2 years ago, and it was right after he had completely torn his UCL. And the thing that happened 2 years ago was his UCL was partially torn. He knew that, the Mets knew that, but instead of going in to find out why he had partially torn his UCL, they just had him continue to pitch until it tore completely. So it's really not a surprise that the route they're taking now is, essentially the same thing. It's just, well, we'll just rest him and then throw him back out there until something else goes. There isn't.
Yeah, they didn't correct the mechanics. I have a pitcher right now with a partially torn UCL that did not want to have surgery. He was going a different route. And the first thing I had to do was identify the way he was throwing, and all he had to do was play catch for me. And I said, if you keep playing even catch like this, your UCL is going to tear more. So we've had to work with his arm mechanics, and it's a major issue, and it takes a long time. If you're a pitcher and you have a tear, you get it fixed. But this guy wanted to go a different route, but the first thing I had to do was keep him. He had to fix. He had a wrist issue and a few things he was doing with his elbow, and I had to fix it because in pain and like 10 more throws. So I've been working with him for months on this, and it's been a huge long haul. But the first thing you look at is, what did he do that was tearing it? Because it will continue to tear it, especially if he's not having surgery. So I forgot that we did that show 2 years ago. Wow. Anyway, poor Zack. But anyway, that would be my advice to the Mets.
Yeah. Well, that's the way it goes at the MLB level. We're mostly talking to amateur coaches and hoping that they are listening to what we're saying and taking the right steps. So I think that's it now for pitch counts, because I'm tired of talking about pitch counts. I want to hear what our teaching moment is this week.
Well, this is never a dull moment in my world. So in the last few weeks, I've gotten, let's put it this way. In the last few weeks, I've had so many calls and emails asking me questions about the stride that it started stirring my insides, because if there's anything that gets me more upset when I hear people saying things incorrectly about the stride, is some of the crazy things that I hear about the stride. And what's interesting is the people who say these things are really, none of them really have a background in, to understand things like a stride, how it's produced, you have to have anatomy, you have to have kinesiology, you have to understand biomechanics, you have to understand motor control, you have to understand physics because you're on a downward plane. There are so many layers of knowledge you have to have. And the thing is, you don't have, but those of us who work in science, we don't have to have knowledge just so we can figure it out. It's already figured out in the world of science and literature, because when you're a graduate student, the first thing you have to do, and pitching was my thing, is break it down into phases. You have to know the purpose of each phase, every single biomechanical thing. Then you also have to know the qualitative thing, which is the kinesiology. So you talk about numbers in the biomechanics, you talk about the muscles in the kinesiology, and trust me, this is a spreadsheet that might go across an 8-foot table. You've got boxes and phases. So, and you use science to look up the information. I don't just sit here and go, oh, let me see, what could it be? No, your job is to research the truth about the movement. And there are, my shelves are loaded with biomechanics books, kinesiology books, where there's experts on the pitching motion. But anyway, with that being said, it is why it is funny to me and gets crazy to me when someone who doesn't have that background looks at pitching, thinks they see what they think they see, and then they put it out there. Now listen, I don't have any problem with anybody sitting looking and going, this is how I think it's done. But if you don't know that's how it's done, please don't go out and teach it. Now, the other thing I want to say before I move forward with this is I know that baseball used to be a sport where there really wasn't much science involved. Science has become involved in the last 10 to 20 years, and it's even more involved now. So even sometimes coaches who don't know will go out and hire a quote-unquote scientist just to back up what they're believing. And so I know that coaches have had a lot on them. And I respect them for that. And that's why part of my business was at the beginning, I want to help coaches be smarter because coaches have such great skills that I don't have at all. But if I can give them a little background, they can be better at their jobs. And now we have baseball infiltrated with people who don't have any background in movement at all. And then they hire quote unquote people who say they're sports scientists or they're this or they're that. But they go to them and say, this is what I think happens and let's prove it. And you can take almost any research, and if you don't know how to read research, you can interpret it any way you want. Something might look like, oh, look at this number is higher here when he does this, so that's good. No. If you don't have layers of knowledge, you might know, no, you don't want a higher number there. That's bad. So that's what I mean. So we've got to, I want everyone out there to know that please don't believe everything you hear. So in the last few weeks, actually, I started getting upset a few years ago. I was at a conference doing a presentation, and a famous coach was at that same conference, and he was suggesting that the way the pitcher got down the hill was by the front leg. And of course, I immediately laughed because I'm thinking the front leg's in the air. So it can't be the one that's moving you, because the back leg's the only leg on the ground. So I thought it was funny, and I kind of laughed, and there were other people that were experts that we all looked at each other because it was kind of humorous. Well, lo and behold, I get a video from a coach the other day, and there now is someone else that's saying that the back leg isn't really important and that they concentrate on the front leg. Well, and then there happened to be a photo. So, because I was saying, okay, well, I think I kind of can think I know what he's saying. It doesn't sound right to me at all, but I'm going to give the guy a benefit of a doubt. But when I saw the photo that accompanied it, I knew what he was saying, which is he was kind of saying what this other guy said. It's the front leg. And you see, what's interesting is when you have background, you don't have anybody who does what I do. We know exactly what role each leg has and what's moving you. And so it's black and white. Trust me, science, kinesiology is black and white. Joints do certain things, they move in certain directions, and certain muscles move those joints. So it's really not complicated to us at all. So if you're on one leg and you're moving down the hill, we know that the hip muscles, the abductors to be exact for any scientists that are listening to me, move if you're a right-handed pitcher, they move your right hip down the hill. It's not the foot, it's not the knee, and the front leg can't pull you down the hill because the front leg can't move because there's no force being generated from it. The force to move sideways is coming from the rear hip. So the back leg is actually controlling the downhill motion. You are on only one leg. Now, when you walk, whether you realize it or not, you're on one leg at a time. You lift one leg through, the other leg is doing what's called single leg support. When you see older people dragging a leg through because they can't lift it, that's not a problem with the leg they're dragging. It's a problem with the leg that they're standing on to pull the leg through. So whatever is stabilizing you has to work so the other leg can move. So the rear hip is moving the body downhill. So I don't want to have people confused about which leg moves you downhill. Now, I have a little test question I ask my pitchers, and in fact, I asked last night. It was really funny, and the kid who's been with me the longest answered it. My question is, which leg is more important in pitching? And pitchers have been with me forever, because I've been asking this question in the 90s I started, and they all, oh, right leg, oh, the front leg, the back leg, and of course, the true answer is they're both important. It's the only leg on the ground. The back leg, the back hip, is responsible for moving the center of mass sideways. And then the front leg lands. And when the front leg touches down, that ends the phase called the stride. And then the front leg has to stabilize very well so that the pelvis and the trunk can rotate, and the back leg now is acting as a stabilizer to the action occurring to turn the pitcher towards the plate. Now, when this most recent thing came about and he said, don't worry about your back leg, we think you should pay more attention to your front leg, I was trying to give him the benefit of the doubt to say, well, the front leg is very important. I mean, you can push, you move your hip sideways down the hill, but if your front leg doesn't know how to reach the ground and stabilize, you're going to be in trouble. But unfortunately, after I looked at the photo, I think what he really was saying is that the front leg is what makes everything happen. And it cannot make everything happen. It does not make everything happen. You're on one leg, but when that foot touches down, the ground reaction force from that front foot landing sends the power up through the leg. And that power that's coming through the leg and going into your rotation is forceful. So your back leg needs to be supporting that. So now your back leg went from being the mover down the hill to the stabilizer as you turn. So both legs are important, but the stride is created by the back leg. I don't want anyone out there to be confused by this, and it makes sense. And if you know how to stand up on one leg and lift, let's say, your left leg up like you're a right-handed pitcher, and you actually know how not to, cheat or whatever, if you try to get your right leg to pull your body down, it won't happen. If you think it happens, your right hip has started to move. There's no way to do it. Trust me, you don't even have to do it. But it's kind of funny when I show people and they laugh because you look like you're going nowhere. So the rear hip is responsible for creating the stride. And, I very rarely come out, obviously there's a lot of crazy stuff out in the market. But when I see something being said that's so not correct, I have to say, first I'm going to say, maybe they knew what they were saying, but they didn't say it in a way that was clear, so people were confused. I kind of want to maybe always say that, but the truth is, I think if you don't know exactly what you're saying and you don't know how to say it so that nobody's confused, then I don't think you should be teaching it. I think you should be not addressing it. You probably have other things you're doing in your business where you're making money. Don't try to teach things that aren't correct. And this bothers me because there's kids that listen to this, and there's kids that can try this. And when you try to move downhill by doing something crazy with your left leg, or that's a right-handed pitcher, you're going to be doing something so incorrect with your right hip that your shoulders become completely affected. And then guess what we have happening next? Incorrect arm mechanics and elbow and shoulder injuries. And everyone knows that my whole thing is let's eliminate injuries. So while this seems like, oh, it's only an issue of the stride, no, the stride creates the base. And if you get off to the wrong start, if you tilt downward, your right arm, your shoulders tilt downward on a plane as you're reaching out, the way this photo looked, there's going to be trouble with the shoulders. So everybody, please know the rear leg is how the stride is created, and it's actually the rear hip.
Okay, Angel, can I just have you add one more thing though? Because I know this is going through coaches' heads as they're listening to you. While that's true about creating the stride from the rear leg, could you talk a little bit about what goes through your mind when coaches say to push off the rubber?
Yeah, and you know what? I wish this was a visual thing so I could actually really teach about the stride. And that's my dream some days to be able to really teach, I mean, visually and everything about the stride because it's an amazing thing. But the thing about the stride is, there are certain people that say, oh, push as hard as you can against the rubber. First of all, if you know that the hip is what's moving you, you know that the force is coming from the hip because the foot isn't going to be able to do that on its own. The foot needs to be in contact with the rubber so the hip can move sideways in the way that it does. So the foot has to be secure. And it is getting ground reaction force. In fact, by the way, it's getting about 30% of the pitcher's body weight as he moves forward. So there is some ground reaction force because you have to stay connected in the foot so the hip can move sideways. You know, it's sort of like connecting something that you want to move something, but it's like if you're pulling a rope and you're pulling a tape measure and you're moving a tape measure out to measure something. Well, the first end of the tape measure has to be held down, right? Or if you just move the tape out and the other end keeps moving, you don't get anywhere. Wow, that's a great way to explain something that's hard to explain. So one side, the foot has to be secure so you can move the other part out. Now, the first mistake I made in school, and I was corrected by my biomechanics professor, I called him up and said, so you have to push off really hard going downhill. And I started to ask him a question. He goes, whoa, wait a minute. What do you mean you push off as hard as you can? He says, you've been reading baseball books again. He said, we don't allow any research or any papers to have baseball books information in there as your resources. I said, well, and I was a total neophyte in mid-90s now. He says, Angel, you're not running. Running is pushing off the back leg as fast as you can and as hard as you can. Running is where the back leg moves forward. You're displacing and moving forward. He says your stride created by your hip has to be a controlled force downward because you have to stop at a certain place and then create additional movements. And if you're going too powerfully, the next movements will have to slam on their brakes before you can create them. So you have to know how to transition correctly. And of course, I'm saying this in my own words right now, which has taken me years to understand. But what the point is, is that it's a very controlled, forceful movement with high intensity, meaning your brain is intense. You know you've got to get to that front leg, but you're not running. And if you put too much power in the beginning of the motion, when the front foot hits, it has to slam on the brakes, and that's where you should be starting to have the energy transfer through your body. One of the things I see as the biggest error in pitchers is that they apply too much force at the beginning, and a lot of the velocity programs, unfortunately, they have drills and things that have guys doing like these amazing 200-mile-an-hour movements before they actually throw. Well, guess what? Look up lever mechanics and look up how energy is transferred through levers, and you'll know that, the next movement will have to be slower if you slam into it too fast. You have to know when and where to apply power. You are not running down the hill. The front leg has to be able to catch you. It's got to be forceful and powerful and connected, but it is not the end all of explosiveness to your body. It might be an explosive movement, but not to overcome the motion of the body. It has to be just the right amount because your front foot has to land, and then you get really intense in terms of the rotation velocity. So I know it's difficult, but this is a very important concept, and it is science, and we know it to be true. That's why when you look at major league pitchers, other than a few of them who I don't want to name because I know what programs they've done, and you can see that their timing is off because of it. But when you basically look at major league pitchers, they look like that stride is, you can tell they're intense, but it almost looks effortless and easy. In fact, a lot of major league guys that throw in the 90s look like they're moving slowly, and people say that all the time because the thing that has to move fast is the shoulder. In the end, the shoulder has to move fast, so the way you move at the beginning cannot compromise that shoulder rotation.
Well, that's about everything that we could possibly know about the stride without really any pictures or videos. So thank you, Angel. That's comprehensive to say the least. So we've already talked a lot from a scientific standpoint, but I believe we still have a little bit to talk about in terms of getting it done on the mound with science. So what do we have this week?
Well, I love this segment because I can talk to you and teach you the things that I have just recently learned, because the cool thing about having a background is you're always thinking, you're always learning, and also my clients make me smarter because they become such a believer in knowing that if they know what muscles do everything, that they can do things better. So what's happened in the last year is pitchers have been coming to me about their pitches. And I always say, and I laugh and I say, I'm not a pitching coach, but they have questions that would have me thinking. And then, of course, I convert everything into muscles because muscles do everything. And so I learn. And as you know, I've talked about the changeup and I've talked about the curveball. Well, the most interesting thing that I made a connection on. And so I want to share this, and you coaches are going to know more about this than I do. But I'm going to give you guys a tip that is very, very important. And I want you all, when you're off the podcast, to take a baseball in your hand and play around with this. But I had about 3 or 4 pitchers in the last few weeks come to me about their slider. Their slider, and this is the way they would say, my slider's not working. Okay. And I'd say, well, what do you mean? And I said, I'm going to answer you from a muscular level. Okay. So, of course, the first thing I'm looking at, I say, okay, show me your hand, show me your fingers. And I'm looking at it from a perspective of the way the fingers and the wrist relate to each other. And then I'm asking them what that pitch, whether it's a slider or a cutter or whatever they're talking about, what is it that it's not doing? And then I also say, well, what does it feel like? And so now again, the cool thing about this is I'm coming at this in a very innocent way because I'm not a pitcher. So all I am is somebody who works and analyzes movement. They're putting the ball in my hand. They're telling me where to put the fingers. And then they're showing me how they release it. And all I'm doing is analyzing it as a movement. And the way I was able to fix 3 or 4 issues was by understanding and making suggestions that involved the thumb. And then I started to think about the thumb, and I started to do some work in the gym with my own wrist. And the interesting thing is that the thumb probably controls motion, at range of motion, the ability to move, to turn something, the ability of the wrist to make more than one movement at a time. The position of the thumb can dictate whether the movement you want to have is going to be excessive or inhibited or normal or whatever it is you're trying to do. So with a baseball, and of course the thumb, which when I ask pitchers, about their finger, I mean, the thumb is, they say, oh, it's supporting the ball underneath, just like the baby finger or whatever. And nobody ever talks about it like it's as important as the 2 fingers on top of the ball. But listen, the thumb is huge because it's huge to what the wrist can do. So by taking a picture and I say, okay, show me your grip, and then show me the way you release it. And he's not throwing it, he's just turning his hand. So again, I'm analyzing wrist motion. And then I say, okay. And he says, so I can't get it feels like it's coming off, they'll say things like, it feels like it's coming off my baby finger. Or it feels, they'll describe it to me. And of course I say, okay, well, and so then I'm looking, I go, okay, now move your thumb up a little and do that motion. Okay, move it down a little. And their eyes will get real big. They'll go, oh, okay. Wait a minute. I think I got it. Let me go try it. I don't even know which they did. I don't know if they moved it up, if they moved it down, if they moved it under. They throw it and they go, okay, wait a second. And then they try something else. They go, I got it. Oh, wow, Angel, that's so cool. Thank you so much. And that's the end of the conversation. So I started thinking about this. So I went in the gym myself and I started taking my thumb and doing different things with it. And I would have a ball in my hand and just play around with turning, flexing, this and that. And I realized that the thumb can make the wrist be too tight, certain positions, and it can allow the wrist to move whichever way you want from certain positions. So my tip to coaches is, and I know all of you are grip experts, and I'm certainly not a grip expert, but when you have a good pitcher, and this is really, I work with good pitchers, so I don't know if when a pitcher's 10, he can't throw any pitches correctly. I'm not sure this is the deal. But when you've got a good pitcher whose pitch is all of a sudden not working, sometimes the wrist goes through changes because the wrist and forearm are developing from pitching. And if all of a sudden you've got a pitcher who whatever the ball isn't doing that you want it to do, it has something to do with breaking or twisting or turning, which is what changes all the pitches. Go and ask them to show you their grip exactly. You put the ball in your hand with that exact grip, do whatever bending or rotating the hand and forearm has to do to create that pitch, and then move your thumb up or down on the ball or more underneath it or more to the side or less underneath it, and do the motion and see which one of those positions gives the hand and the fingers and the wrist the ability to feel the way it needs to feel in the hand and to get the action you need for it to get for whatever pitch it is. But the thumb is a major player in allowing the wrist to either work well or be inhibited in the way it needs to move to create a pitch. What do you think, Joe?
Well, I say thumbs up to that.
Oh boy, you know what? Oh jeez, I did not see that coming.
That's why I'm the host.
That's so funny. So anyway, my pictures are all now, of course, we're in the gym. They say, do you have anything, exercises for my thumb? And of course I do. But so I have used certain things for the thumb. And of course we do the rice bucket. But is that not a cool connection?
that is a pretty cool connection for someone who isn't a pitching coach. And
Exactly. I know. I know. And of course, guys think it's great because they get, my pitchers know how to pitch. So when something's going, they don't need me to teach them how to pitch. That's why I'm glad I work with the pitching motion. But when something's wrong and they can feel it, they're smart enough to know, I know how to throw this pitch. What is going on? And, their hands and wrists change over time. So sometimes a pitcher has to make an adjustment, and a teeny one. But I know that we're always thinking about the movement finger and the top finger and this and that. But the thumb is so critical to controlling the wrist. So, whenever you get a chance, pick up a ball, take a grip, or do all your little exotic pitch grips, and move the thumb in the wrong place intentionally on something and see what it does, and you'll go, whoa. Big deal. And my guess is there's a lot of pitching coaches out there that already know this, but for those of you who don't think about it, that's your tip. That's my little take-home tip from the field this week.
All right. Well, I mean, as a pitching coach myself, I've definitely experimented with location of the thumb on different pitches for different reasons, but it was more toward, what kind of movement I saw afterward. But the thing that really hit home for me is something that you brought up with a lot of the coaches that are listening. We work with kids. We work with kids who are developing, who their arms are developing, their wrists are developing, they're still growing, and it's something really to think about when you have one of these maturing kids. They may have a certain grip for their pitch, and just because something's growing or getting stronger, it might be time to change the change the thumb location just a little bit, just like you said. And it's something that maybe a major league coach wouldn't have to think about for those kind of reasons, but for coaches like me that deal with kids a lot, it's an interesting thing to keep in mind, especially if we see a really good young pitcher start to lose a little bit location with a certain pitch. So thank you very much, Angel.
And if you just take your thumb and you just move it in and out towards your palm, and you look at your forearm, you'll see how the muscles of the thumb move way up into the forearm. So the difference in pitches is the difference in the way the forearm rotates and the way the wrist flexes, extends, or does whatever it does. And so because the thumb controls the wrist and has such control over the forearm and is a major player with the entire hand and the range of motion, it is critical that you look at it from not just the perspective of like you do, like, if I put my thumb here, it spins. Well, why does it spin more? Why does it break more? Because my wrist was able to do what it needed to do. So the thumb doesn't create the pitch. The wrist and the forearm changes to create the pitch. The fingers are on the ball to accommodate that and create the spin. But if the thumb is holding back the wrist and the forearm from making the range that you need for all those pitches, then you're going to have trouble. And so that's why it's such a cool connection. It's a muscular way to look at. It's just like when a pitcher drops his arm, he can't rotate back far enough. Okay, well, when you drop your thumb or lift your thumb or do whatever, your wrist and forearm can't work enough. It's the same kind of thing. So it's a muscular way to look at the thumb. So I loved the connection. My pitchers loved it. And, of course, I love passing on anything to inspire people to think about things in a different way.
Yeah, pretty cool. Pretty cool. Well, you know what? I think we've jam-packed enough into this episode. I think we're done with Season 4, Episode 8 of The Fix. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Fix. Please pass along to another pitcher, coach, or parent. Please subscribe to the podcast. If you have no idea what a podcast is, go to the App Store on your smartphone and search for Baseball Pitching The Fix, and you can download our app. If you want to learn more about Angel, you can go to her website. It's gymscience.com. You can also email her, angel@gymscience. For more about me, Joe Janish, you can visit fixingpitchers.com. And you can also hit me up on Twitter @fixingpitchers. Both Angel and I hope that you learned something this episode. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. And in the meantime, we wish you safe and effective performance on the pitching mound.